from the United States Capitol's Congressional Auditorium in Washington, D.C., the Government Blockchain Association presents The Future of Money, Governance, and the Law.
So we're going to start with our first panel, and it actually approaches the topic that Scott brought up as his second point, and that is elections and voting. So I'd like to introduce Susan Eustis, and she will introduce her panel. This panel is going to be about elections accessibility and the security panel.
So it's a pleasure to be here today. And I agree with the previous speaker. I think voting is a huge new use for blockchain, and I think it's going to make the voting more secure. And what our committee, I'm chairman of the committee, the Government Blockchain Committee on Elections, and what we're looking at are building standards for blockchain use in election, because without standards, the whole thing goes up in smoke. But I've got three panelists, very able, with their feet on the ground in the election business. I'm just an analyst. You know, I invented the first electronic voting machine, and now I get to write about elections and what should happen. But Donald Kersey is here from the West Virginia Secretary of State's office, and he's an attorney. He was a deputy in that office. He was the election director. He's now the general counsel. And he's here to tell us about blockchain voting. His state was the first to use blockchain in the country for voting. And he was the first to have mobile voting overseas, both of which are just wonderful examples of how to modernize our voting systems.
Thank
Go ahead,
you.
Donald.
Good morning. Good morning. I think it was President Reagan, I Googled this on the way over. I think it was President Reagan that's credited with the famous phrase, there are no 9 scarier words than I'm from the government and I'm here to help. I disagree with him. I think those are great reasons and great words to help someone. You're from the government. We are a government of people. And at least in West Virginia, we approach problems with solutions that we don't know exist. In 2018, West Virginia became the first state in the nation to offer mobile voting to overseas citizens and military that are deployed. The reason we did that is because we saw a major problem. The Federal Voting Assistance Program in 2018 put a report out to Congress that analyzed the 2016 overseas citizens' voting history and data. And what that report said was that only 6.9% of eligible overseas citizens had their ballots counted in the 2016 election. It's a huge problem. So we approached it with mobile voting because of the accessibility and the ability for someone to pull their phone out anywhere in the world and make a selection. Where blockchain comes in is the security piece. How does the government provide ease of access to communicate back home or in your state or in your city, but also secure your information, your transactions, your communications? Blockchain provides that. It eliminates the single point of failure that traditional methods of communication and storage don't provide. How many of us have heard time and time again of a city or a state or a country being held at ransom because their information wasn't properly secured? West Virginia is spending tens of thousands of dollars monthly to pay off some ransomware, nefarious actor from another nation state that holds them and those records at bay. And even when you pay the ransom, you don't get your money, you don't get all your records back. At least that's the case in West Virginia. Blockchain can help solve that problem, not just with your records that are stored at the state level, but also at the county level, your communications, and things of that nature. So by putting our foot forward, we believe that we're on our way to creating standards, to finding solutions to problems that currently exist, rather than approaching problems that we don't know exist with the solution that we want to use. Blockchain could be a solution for a problem, and we believe that, at least in the voting world, it is a way to prove to the voters that their ballot is being cast, counted, and secured in the manner that they intended it. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. So next up, we have Amelia Gardner, and she spent 15 years in the private sector, 1 year in government. And what I love the most is she's the mother of 6. And we have here a 13-year-old and a 7-month-old, and there's some more. And their job is to stand in the back and say, "Mommy!" That's what my grandchildren do. So she's a strong advocate of security in the election systems. And I also was impressed in speaking with her that she recognizes the vulnerabilities of paper ballots. And when you start talking about audit trails, everybody says, "Oh, paper ballots," but there's a lot more to it. We're living in a digital age. Even my local grocer uses a digital audit trail. So when we talk about elections, I think there's a huge place for blockchain. Go ahead, Amelia.
Thank you. You have to forgive me if I sneeze. I'm not sure, but I think I might be allergic to the partisan rhetoric of this building, and it's causing me to have some allergies at the moment.
Oh, no.
As she said, my name is Amelia Powers Gardner, and I am really excited to be here with you to talk about how I have been able to implement technology in government. As Deak mentioned, the words from the government I'm here to help typically strikes fear in the hearts of people everywhere. When's the last time you walked into a DMV office and thought, "I'm so glad I'm at the government and they're here to help," right? Most people, when they think of the DMV, they think of like buzzing fluorescent lights and really irritable, slow service. But local government doesn't have to be like that. In fact, there's a lot of people working in government who want to do great things. I've been in office for just over a year. I spent 12 years in the private sector, 3 years consulting, and then in 2018, in a moment of severe weakness, I agreed to run for public office. And then I was elected. So now here I am, just about 12 and a half months through this journey, and sometimes it feels like 12 and a half years through this journey in the public sector. But one of the most important things that I found out is my office, I have 35 employees. I inherited 30 of them as career service employees, and the vast majority of them are incredibly hardworking people that had no vision and no leadership prior to me coming into office. And when we gave them vision and leadership, they worked hard and have done amazing things in just 12 months. What I want to talk about is less about the technical details of blockchain. My hope is that most of you here understand those technical details of blockchain. But what I want to talk about is how do you successfully implement these solutions in government? That is going to be the hardest part. These solutions are out there, and there are brilliant people building them, but getting governments to adopt them is probably the biggest challenge we have. So that's what I want to talk about. I've got a 5-step process to do that. Number one, identify the problem. What problem are you trying to solve? Implementing technology for the sake of implementing technology is not going to work in government the vast majority of the time. You need to identify the problem you're trying to solve. Envision the solution. That's where the really smart people come in, have them help develop a solution. Then you have to create an implementation plan. This is important for the stakeholders, for the people working for you and for the people around you in government. If they don't see the plan, they're not going to just buy-in. So you've got to envision that plan, and then you have to execute. You've got to execute, motivate your people, reward your people, and execute. And then here's the key. This is the most important part. This is the part that we nerds, I myself am a nerd as well, this is the part we often forget. You have to tell a story. The general public will remember a story. They're not going to remember the word immutable, even though it's incredibly important. They're not going to really understand security, even though that's vital. But they will remember a story. The most important thing to implement blockchain is solve a problem and tell a story. So I'm going to walk you through how we did that. One of the things that I implemented during these last 12 months is, like Deak, blockchain voting. We actually use the same vendor, we use the same process. So the technical details are the same. When I came into office, voting had been a disaster in my county. The governor of my state literally called my office the epicenter of dysfunction. It was great for me while I was campaigning that he called my opponent the epicenter of dysfunction. But nonetheless, it rang true. The lieutenant governor who's over elections in the state of Utah told me that in his 7 years as lieutenant governor, 8 of his top 10 biggest issues came out of my office. 8 of the 10 for the entire state came out of my office. So this tells you we had a lot to do. I came into elections, and here was my problem. I had a great staff, and my staff could help solve problems for the local community. But when it came to our overseas and military voters and our voters with disabilities, we were still using email to vote. Email that gets hacked every day on every continent. We were using email to vote. We have no way to verify you are who you say you are. We don't know who's sending in that email. And you don't even know if we got your email. And if we did open your email, you don't know if we actually counted your vote. There was no security, no way in this process. So that's a major problem. That was our problem. Next, we looked at a solution. The solution we found was mobile voting. With mobile voting, overseas and military citizens can cast a vote anywhere they can get an internet signal and they have a smart device. And for the disability community, for those disabled citizens voting through our county, this is even more vital because you can use a device that is tailored to you. Whether you're hearing impaired, visually impaired, physically impaired, your device that you use to get through life is already configured for you. So there's our solution using mobile voting. So create an implementation plan. We went through, we said, okay, we're going to do a pilot. We're going to start with overseas and military voters, following Deak's model. Thank you. Then we will add disabled voters. And in the meantime, with my staff, I went through the timeline. We did flow charts, showed the staff step by step how this is going to work. That we executed, we did 2 pilots, one in August of last year for the municipal primary for just the overseas and military voters. Then we did a second pilot during the municipal general election in November of last year, and we added in the disabled people of our county. Now here's where it gets fun. Then we tell a story. Now here's why the story is so important. Voting can be very controversial. Technology can be controversial. You combine the two, and it increases, the controversy increases at an exponential rate. You will have people running around in the streets screaming the sky is falling if you introduce mobile voting in your county. It will happen. I have several of them in my county. And you have to, right? You will have people running through the streets screaming the sky is falling, making a lot of noise. We have to overcome their noise. Do we have my slide with my video? Who's running the AV? I'm wondering if we could show that real quick. See if we can pull up the video, and you'll see this is how we tell a story. as he's pulling that up, I'll kind of preface this. We were getting a lot of media attention for the story. Most of it was interest. But we got a call from a nice reporter who said, do you have anybody that's going to use this mobile voting that we could maybe interview? I think this is a kind of a cool story. I think people might be interested in it. Do you have a person who would be willing to maybe vote on camera? And I was really excited. I was like, yes, we do. We have the perfect person for you. I grew up down the street from a really, really nice old lady. Her name is Maxine Grimmett. And when I was growing up, I thought Maxine was like 112. And when it came time for the disabled people to have mobile voting, there's not like a registry of disabled people, nor should there be. I want to clarify that. The Nazi Germany taught us we do not make registries of disabled people. So there isn't a registry of disabled people. But I wanted people to be able to vote on this. So I sent out feelers on social media and to all my friends and family and said, do you know anyone who would qualify as disabled that would be interested in voting at their home and not have to go to the polls? My mom replied to me and said, hey, what about Maxine Grimmett? And I replied and said, you mean like Maxine that was 112 when I was growing up? Is she still alive? My mom said, yeah, she's as spry as ever. See if Maxine will do it. So I call up, I was like, does Maxine have a cell phone? My mom was like, no, she's 106. She doesn't have a cell phone, but her daughter, who's 80, does. So I call up Maxine's 80-year-old daughter. And I'm like, Dixie, this is Margie's daughter. I'm the county clerk. Does your mom want to vote live on the news? She's like, I don't know. Let's ask her. Hey, Mom, you want a news camera to come and vote live on the news? Maxine says, visitors? Yes, I want visitors. Bring them here. So we came. Are we able to play that video?
We have to stop. We're
Okay.
2 minutes over.
That's fine. So, and we had Utah's oldest voter, who's 106 years old. We brought her an iPad, and she voted live on camera. And while she was voting, it occurred to us, this woman was before women had the right to vote in this country. She was born before women had the right to vote in this country, and we brought her a ballot because she was 106 years old and she broke her ankle last year and she's home-ridden now. Here's the story. The vast majority of the citizens don't care that we use blockchain technology. All they care about is that if somebody has a fit, they are taking away Maxine's right to vote. And gosh darn it, she was born before women had the right to vote, and no one is taking away her right to vote. That is how we implement blockchain technology in government.
Great presentation. Carlos, I don't know your last name.
Toriello,
Okay.
Herrerías.
Got it. So Carlos is a passionate citizen, and he'll tell you about it. He's wonderful. But he's been working to get voting going and to use blockchain down in Guatemala, and he leads the GBA in Mesoamerica. He's worked hard to develop secure elections in Guatemala and elsewhere. And that's why he's on the panel. He's really got his feet on the ground in terms of blockchain.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Carlos Toriello Herrerías. I'm a citizen and resident of Guatemala City Zone 4, an innovative and creative borough that I recommend you all visit, whenever you're in the neighborhood. I'm the general manager for Fundacion HCG.org, a Guatemalan nonprofit that develops civic experiences. I'm also the chief community builder at Ceiba.io, a volunteer community that seeks to accelerate blockchain adoption in Mesoamerica. Think Mexico through Panama. I'm here to share some lessons learned from becoming the organizers for the movement known as Fiscal Digital, where we count the votes together. Quick clarification. In Guatemala and several other Spanish-speaking states, a fiscal is a combination of a witness and a prosecutor, a type of empowered and often legally responsible for keeping the system in check. Having said that, for clarity, when you hear me say fiscal digital, imagine digital witness. Let's give it a try. Fiscal digital. Digital witness. Fiscal digital. Cool. Fiscal digital is to an election audit and compete with one another via gamification. We'll unpack, but the key takeaway for now is that with enough users, Fiscal Digital can generate a complete audit that is verifiable, immutable, decentralized, and publicly accessible in almost real time, because we count the votes together. If we, the people's hands, it can be done. This means that mathematically demonstrable evidence to counter a claim of election fraud could, and I believe should, be provided. If you can't prove in real time that an election is supremely spotless, then reach conclusions that aren't based on reality, but rather on someone's opinion.
So, Carlos, it's time to open it up to the audience, and I hope people will continue to ask you questions. So it's now time for us to take questions from the audience. And thank you, panel. You can ask questions for anyone here. Go ahead.
Hi, Carlos. I want to hear about the gaming part of your project.
Thank you.
Many of you probably know that Bolivia had elections in October that were eventually mathematically proven fraudulent. Chaos reigned, and it was only because the army and police refused to obey orders of violence that the president was removed from power. Scary times were had and continue in Bolivia. What most of you probably don't know is that something very similar almost happened in Guatemala last year. This was the catalyst for Fiscal Digital and why our ragtag volunteer army in need of a sponsor built the code and published it on GitHub. It took 3 weeks and began 5 days after the June 16th national election. While we were building the code, Guatemala had presidential, congressional, and municipal candidates from dozens of political parties openly calling the election a fraud. Protests began erupting, and our team felt that we were on the powder keg that was about to explode, striving to lighten the load. Everyone on the team chose to remain anonymous in their work for fear of potential violence, unless forced to come forward as a point of principle, dictated by our conscience, as it happened for me. But let's get back to unpacking Fiscal Digital and understand how we count the votes together. Blockchain, crowdsourced OCR, and gamification. We're blockchain polyamorous. We want to and actively work with any blockchain that our team has the ability to operate. Somewhat miraculously, we succeeded in using Bitcoin, Horizon, EOS, and Dogecoin. But how?
So here's a real-life example of blockchain going in to the places where security in the election process is desperately needed. Any more questions? Yes.
This is for Deak. You all were able to conduct a pilot program pretty much just without legislation, from my understanding. One of the problems we have in South Carolina is that we're unable to do that without legislation. Can you provide the statutory reference that y'all have available that gives you the authority to do so that perhaps we can implement it in our state?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. I think it's West Virginia Code Section 335.
We will try to get this up on the panel if you come in. We're run out of time, folks, but we'll try to. You can ask questions, and we will try to get the answers up on the GBA site, the election site. There's plenty of place to ask questions, plenty of place for us to post answers. We're delighted that you came. Thank you.
We have 4 minutes.
Okay.
We just passed new legislation. You're right. We didn't need to implement a new statute or pass a new statute to implement technology for overseas voters. What we did do is recently, following in the steps of Utah, has passed a new law that allows us to expand electronic transmission, marking, and return from disabled voters stateside, which has never been done in West Virginia. So now we do have legislation that clearly marks out who is eligible, and the description for the technology is not limited to mobile or blockchain. It talks about electronic transmission, and our office has to prescribe the standards. But I'd be happy to provide you the statutes, and I'll send you the new bill as well.
I can send you our statutes as well. We were able to do it as well. Under UCAVA, the way UCAVA in Utah was written allowed us, but for the disabled voters, we didn't do the electronic submission clause. The way we wrote the disabled clause was anything approved for overseas voters is approved for disabled voters. That was less controversial. It didn't raise as many detractors. But I can give you those references as well.